a quick catch up on where the game's at then in Unconditional Surrender World War II in Europe. I haven't done any filming for a little while, haven't recorded anything, and I've rocked forward into May 44, getting those bad weather months out of the way, and the on both fronts, the Eastern and Western front, both the Russians and the combined American-British forces have been trying to press, have been trying to attack in poor and severe weather, just to make some ground. You can see here the Vichy French forces are on the board, and the all this armour that the British and Americans have has been just trying to push forward and push against it, and it's incredibly hard going, you know, getting that -2 for the poor weather, and then a lot of the time -1 in mountains, and you're only getting +1 for being armour and +1 for your aircraft, and all of a sudden you can have what appears to be overwhelming superiority and be getting evens on the dice rolls. And and severe weather can be pretty unpleasant as well, unless you're trying to cause retreats, but most of the time you get a draw or the occasional retreat. I mean, it's really tough going, trying to attack in this weather. But we've pushed into May, and the weather for May has gone to the fair across the board. So this is going to be the first turn, really, that the Allies and the Russians have had a summery turn of really good weather to really push hard into the German force. You can see as well there that wow, that German unit there should not be reduced. The Africa Corps is doing its best to die again a second time, but it certainly isn't reduced. That got rebuilt. So what can I say? So all I'm trying to highlight is that the Vichy French are in play here, and that the combined British American force is pushing in as hard as it can. It's got lots and lots of convoys now. The Americans played a surprise attack simply to get simply so that they could drop the Mulberry ports in, so that they could have another port to use to get supply into the country. And we'll see how far they get. But these Germans really are, I mean, they're excellent on the attack, and they're extremely stubborn on the defence. So it's quite tough trying to push them back, as the Russians have found. Let's see if I can find a decent spot for the camera over here, a little bit closer to this front. So you can see over here in Romania, the Russians have finally broke through that line, and made it into Bucharest and knocked Romania out of the war. But the Germans have managed to fall back to a line, still in the mountains here, so they're still going to get some of those terrain benefits. So they've got that armoured unit, 3rd Panzer I think it is, anchoring a couple of infantry units, and they've got some air behind them as backup, and then, you know, bits and bobs kicking around to try and keep them alive. That armoured unit actually survived an absolutely ridiculous situation where it was almost entirely surrounded somewhere just up in the mountains here north of Bucharest, and managed to punch its way out with a couple of it was the only thing. I mean, the German at the time, it was in, I think, poor weather or severe weather, I can't remember which, and the Germans weren't really expending much production points on anything much. It was one of those winter turns where you've still got lots kicking around, and the Germans had done their kind of reorganising and stabilising their lines, and they just threw a couple of production points into it to give it some movement points to attack, to see if it could get itself out. And the Germans rolled a couple of, they threw a couple of markers in. I think they threw an airdrop in on its behalf to try and extricate it, and that worked, and that allowed it to move 1 hex, but it still needed to fight its way through a second one of these Russian motorised units. Worked it out, and the only roll that would allow it to win the combat was a 6 for the Germans and a 1 for the Russians, and lo and behold, I rolled a 6-1 for them, and the bloody thing got away. So the Russians were far from impressed with that turn of events, and 3rd Panzer has something of a legendary status amongst the German army now, because it's survived in almost in total encirclement and got away again. Yeah, unbelievable stuff. But they are just ridiculously tough, some of these German units, and they just don't go away. And you can see they've got this kind of, again, if you put these kind of checkerboard defences together where you just, you give your front unit space to retreat so that it can't just be reduced for failure to retreat. If you give them space to retreat into, and you create a second line, behind a river line or in some mountains or some woods, it is incredibly slow going to try and get through this. And the Russians have 2 or 3 good attacks in here with its best armour units backed up with air and so on, and then it just grinds to a halt. So it's really tough to break down. And the other thing is, you'd think, okay, maybe these Russians could use assaults to break it down, but that uses up your entire turn's movement. You can't move after an assault. So if all you do, if I zoom in here and you can see, for example, 2 Russian armour and a Russian infantry in here, you've got a Russian infantry and 2 Russian armour. If they assault into that German infantry, 15th infantry there, well, that's fine. They might cause a defender retreat, but they're not, they make 1 hex in their entire turn, and 1 hex in their entire turn is not going to get the Russian army into Germany. They 3 or 4 of those, and they make 3 hexes, and it's just, they're just not going anywhere unless they can do better. So the Allies, Russian and Western, have to find some way of leveraging something to push them forward a little bit further, because this German line is holding here against the Russians. This line is slowly collapsing, and that may prompt a retreat if the Russians in the backup here can come forward and sort of swarm these units and threaten its supply again. But that might work, but that will require a declaration of war on Hungary in here, which I think I discussed before, and I think is quite likely anyway. And similarly, I think the Americans and British have to get Vichy out of the way here and then, and force these Germans to drop back. But then they're going to be facing the same thing in this gap between Antwerp and the Swiss border. What's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hexes across there. They're going to be facing quite serious opposition, although the Germans do not have the armour down here that they do on the Eastern Front. They've only got 1 armoured unit holding in here, and all the British are armoured. British and German, British and Americans are armoured. So we'll see whether they can make any ground in Western Europe. That's what's coming up, hopefully in the next 3 or 4 months of good weather. That's what the Allies are hoping for. The Germans are hoping for some freakish rain. End of June 44 in Unconditional Surrender, World War II in Europe. Just finished the sort of activations across the board, and the good weather has allowed the Russians and the Anglo-American allies to really make some progress finally. I've got some horrible reflections on this plexi. I'll try and keep the camera kind of lower down like this at an angle. So here you can see there's a substantial line of Allied armour, and they've managed to knock out that there was a German armour unit in this line that was kind of anchoring everything, that was holding everything together, and the Allies kind of surrounded it and blitzed it and knocked it out, and are hoping now that they just get a turn to have a crack at some of these garrisons where they can gang up a bit and just push and push and push and try and force them back. So yeah, this is the situation here. As you can see, this is all armour across the board, and the Allies have pretty much I mean, not total, but they have air superiority over here as well, although virtually every aircraft unit on the board is entirely spent, is on 6 sorties on it. There's not a spare sortie to be found on either side, but the Germans have three air units over here, but you can see they're all entirely spent, and that is meaning that these bomber units, the American and the British bomber units, are being able to wage quite effective economic warfare on Germany, and that is having an effect. Slowly but surely the German factory loss counter has crept up there, and you can see it there on the 5 now, and that is eating into German production, and they are feeling it slowly. And over here on the Eastern Front, the Russians have made a nice breakthrough here in Romania, and now edging their way towards Hungary, that they declared war on simply to open up the space to move through. We've got a couple of 3rd Panzer is surrounded yet again, but after its heroics escaping from being surrounded, it was in a position much like that before and managed to get out with some utterly ridiculous dice rolls, and I wouldn't bet against it doing the same again. Just wasting that 3rd Guard unit, which actually has nowhere to retreat to if it's attacked, and then moving in there and then doing the same to another Russian unit and just forcing its way out. However, the Russians have, elsewhere up the line, have seriously thinned out the German armour. Up here you can see all of a sudden it's infantry and not a lot else all the way through the central section, and the Russians had a massive go at targeting German armour with big assaults, throwing their heavy artillery in, throwing air support in where they had superiority, throwing in as many armour units against one as they could, and just racking up huge modifiers where possible. And you know, against one of these armour units they had a +10 DRM, which is the highest on the chart, just from air superiority, tanks, and heavy artillery, and yeah, it being elite, and yeah, just every last modifier they could find. So this German line has looked so solid for so long, and now it is looking quite badly busted apart. So yeah, June 44 and things suddenly looking very, very shaky for the Axis. I should point out the designer Sal, Eagle-Eyed Sal, has watched a lot of my videos on Board Game Geek, perhaps even all of them, and points out my my slight rules indiscretions. I do make a few errors, which I just consider completely normal for the size and complexity of game. You can't keep absolutely every last thing in your head the whole time, and sometimes things just slip a little. And those 2 Swedish units there are actually illegally placed in Prussia. They're not allowed in Germany apparently, but hell, you know, I'm going to let it go. I really don't mind, especially since I've been doing the decent thing and using that convoy there to supply them. It's not like I've been cheekily supplying them for free. That convoy's been racking up. I've been racking up sorties on that convoy to establish a supply line into Stockholm for these Swedes. So I think the Germans, although you know they are there illegally, you know, it's swings and roundabouts in this particular situation. The Germans have paid for them, so I'm not just going to repatriate them. I'm just going to let them get swallowed up as the Russian army advances, which is the most likely outcome here. I mean, they could end up being the difference, but I really seriously doubt those 2 not particularly competent Swedish armies are really going to make much of a difference when this lot wades into them. So that is where I'm at. I was in the poorer weather. I was really struggling to get anywhere at all against these Germans, and suddenly cracks appear, and it's like a big pane of glass. It suddenly seems to shatter all the way across the board all at once. However, it has to be said, it doesn't take that long to rebuild units. They're on this sort of rotor, and so this lot, although there's you know some quite nice units in there, they will be reappearing they'll reappear in August, and then they will bump up to full strength in September. No, they will reappear in July and bump up to full strength in August, actually. And this lot are about to reappear now, provided the Germans can afford their full rebuilds, which I think they've got to. They've got to try. They need some things on the board occupying some space. So, yeah. This is all suddenly looking quite tricky for the old Germans. So I'm going to have to think quite carefully about what they do. But you know, having said that, you know, neither the Russians nor the Western Allies have come close to setting foot in Germany yet. So you know, they're doing quite a decent job of defending, and to be honest, the Germans on the Western Front, on the Eastern Front, counter-attacked into the Russians as well, and just bloodied their nose a little bit, just to remind them that these Panzer units aren't entirely toothless, even though they're sitting there looking like they're defending. If they decide to throw a few attacks around, they can blow things away pretty easily. So that is the situation. The Italians are down here are really just sort of blocking, and the Americans detached an armour just down there to sit on the border and make sure there was no cheeky attempts by the Italians just to sneak in through the back door here and start gobbling up towns and forcing convoys out, because that would be extremely messy in terms of supplying this big Allied army. So that's just a blocking action down there. And similarly, the Italians aren't they're not stupid. They're not venturing out to try and get in the way of this Russian army. Even if I'm not even sure they're allowed to, I don't think they can. They might be able to set foot in Yugoslavia because that's a conquered minor, but I don't think they're allowed in Hungary because that's not. That's an ally. Anyway, there it is, and I'll just keep pushing on and see how the Germans hold on. I mean, militarily they're looking a little bit shaky at the moment, and unfortunately for them, there's been good weather in May and June, and we're now coming into 3 months of guaranteed good weather in July to September. So they've got 3 months to hold on without the weather being able to save them, which could get pretty painful. But having said that, they're not, come down here on the national will table, and the Germans are down to 30 national will, which seems low. Well, it's low when they've been up as high as 58 or so, but still, 30. It's not like they're about to, you know, collapse from loss of national will anytime soon. So provided they can just stop any disasters, they should be able to, you know, they're hoping they can make it through to the winter, and then see what they can do in terms of a bit of rebuilding before the final push by the Allies in the spring. And I think from the Allies' point of view, they realise now that the Germans are crumbling economically a little bit, struggling to pay for attack and defence and the Luftwaffe and the rebuilds required, and will probably just need to keep the pressure on, just keep attacking even when the weather's horrible, just to force the Luftwaffe to fly and you know, try and force this German economy to incur costs and pressures, even if it's costing the Russians a little bit more, because their economic situation now is ridiculous. You know, they're maxing out on the production points every turn, so they can afford it. So yeah, this kind of grind was getting a little bit monotonous, and it's suddenly all of a sudden it's just erupted, and there's all kinds of chaos and mayhem. And I've really got to think again, and look at the board state and try and work out how to keep the Germans viable for a couple of months. So it's going to be a lovely rich puzzle to try and work out how to do that, and I'm quite looking forward to the summer of '44 now. It's going to be extremely exciting, I think.